Hello, my real lovelies. Welcome back to the channel, and as always, welcome to my home. I want to start today's video off by saying a really big happy Canada Day, which was actually on Monday. I forgot to wear my Canadian maple leaf replica brooch. So I'm wearing it now instead. So a happy belated Canada Day to all Canadians out there, wherever you may be in the world. I'm also wearing the Duchess Tech Crescent Tiara and my own strand of multicolored pearls. They are real. Right, and also I thought we'd have a nice background. We've got French Polynesia Bora Bora in the background because today is dull and in the UK. We're still not having a very good summer. Today's video, without further ado, let's get into it. It's going to be about the elections that are going on in the UK, but don't worry, do not despair. I'm not going to be pushing any political party. This is all very objective, so you are safe to watch this video regardless of your political leanings. But I am going to talk very factually about what goes on, and also the monarch's, the sovereign, the crown's role when it comes to elections, and I suppose what is a constitutional monarchy, as it's very pertinent. So this video will go out before the elections. Now the elections happen this year on July the 4th, which is also the US Independence Day. So it's a big day. It was a snap election. The current incumbent government is the Conservative Party, who is led by the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. So it's within his power to call an election at any point during the 5-year fixed term. So I think the 5-year fixed term was up something like January or February of 2025. He could have left it as late as maybe September, October, November, but he didn't. He called it early, so it was a real big gamble. And of course, the Conservative Party have been in power for 14 years. And then obviously we've had lots of things go on politically over that 14-year period. So it's a big span of time. So the elections are happening. Of course, in the UK, there are many other political parties, including a new party called Reform. There's the Green Party, the Liberal Democrats, Labour, which is probably going to be, which is the opposition party. Now, the polls, the one thing that people can't dispute is that the Labour Party in the polls have done better than the Conservatives all the way through this general election campaign. So the likelihood is, now do not hold me to this, but if you are to believe the polls, then we are probably going to have a change of government and a change of Prime Minister. So if we do have, one of two outcomes, it's either going to be the Conservatives or a coalition government. We have had what's called a hung parliament and a coalition government in the past, or it's going to be a Labour victory, and they are talking about a super majority. So we're going to have to wait and see which way that goes. The one thing I would say is, if you are eligible to vote in the UK, just go out and vote. It doesn't really matter who you vote for, just as long as you're informed and you do go out and vote. I think voter apathy is the enemy here. So go out, have your say, and then you can't moan with whoever gets in. And of course, with democracy, this is one of the things about democracy. There's always people that don't get what they want. Anyway, that said, it's looking likely there's going to be a change of Prime Minister to the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer. Yes, he was knighted by Her late Majesty. So he is a member, technically, of the ennobled elite. So, regardless of your thoughts about political persuasions, let's go through a few scenarios. So, what happens when Rishi Sunak wanted to call an early general election, or wants to call any election? You inform His Majesty, the Sovereign. The Sovereign gives consent, because obviously we have a constitutional monarchy, not a full power monarchy. This is not absolute power. It's a constitutional monarchy with an elected government. By the way, we also don't have in this country a constitution. We don't have a formal written down constitution. I think there's about 5 or 6 other countries in the world that don't have a written down constitution. And you know what? It works quite well. So the closest thing we've got to a written down constitution was, from almost 1,000 years ago with what was called Magna Carta. And this was, I suppose, the first attempt by the people, by Parliament, of limiting the powers of a sovereign. And Magna Carta kind of set out a basic framework, but of course it's so old. And over the centuries, we have kind of developed a system of conventions, rules, guidelines, laws that make up how we govern ourselves. And it works rather well because unlike countries that have written down constitutions where, those constitutions could have been from a few hundred years ago, it's very much of its time. I know you can have amendments to constitutions, but it takes a lot to sort of get that through. Whereas with an unwritten constitution, you can move a lot more smoothly with the times socially. So when laws change, blah, 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 conventions, whatever, it actually ends up being a lot more modern, a lot more up to date than if you have a written down constitution. So that's one of the benefits of having the system the way that we do. And of course it works because we've had this system, for over 1,000 years. So there you go. So where was I? Oh yes, I am going to go off on so many tangents during this chat. I should have written down some notes. Bear with me. So Rishi Sunak spoke to the king, called a general election, took everybody by surprise. And then there has been this sort of 7-week period of campaigning. And of course, the monarch then dissolves parliament. The monarch can open parliament and dissolve it. So you all know about the state opening of parliament. That's the big pomp and ceremony with the king's speech, which of course is written by the government of the day. The king doesn't actually write the speech, just reads it. The king is used as a mouthpiece. That is constitutional monarchy in action. So tomorrow, July the 4th, Britain goes to the polls, and the very next day we will know who has won the election. It doesn't take long. The results, there are certain constituencies and that count their results really quickly. So over the next 24 hours, we will have all of the votes in. By the morning, there will be a result declared, and we will either have, a government that's a minority government that wants to join forces and form a coalition, or we'll have a government that is able to form a majority. If Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives remain in power, he will come outside number 10 Downing Street, the official residence of the British Prime Minister, and he will give a speech. Then he will go to Buckingham Palace and, ask to form permission to form a government. He will inform that he can form a government, and then the Sovereign, King Charles, will give consent. The Prime Minister will go back to number 10, and things will carry on, and they will undergo their programme of government for the next 5 years. There will be a state opening of Parliament, and there we go. If there is a change, now this happens really quick. I know in other countries, if the elections are in something like November, I think in the US, there isn't the handover until February-ish time. There's a transition period. In the UK, no transition period. It happens so quickly. So literally, if the current Prime Minister is voted out, the new Prime Minister goes in the next day and will probably wake up on the day after the elections in number 10 Downing Street. I bet you're thinking, well, what happens to all the current Prime Minister's belongings? Well, they are moved out over the week, and then the new Prime Minister moves in. In previous years, number 10 has been deemed a little bit too small. So when Tony Blair, I'm sure you remember Tony Blair from Labour, when did they win? 1997. He actually resided in the next door flat, number 11, where the Chancellor is supposed to live, because it was bigger. But probably Sir Keir Starmer will, if he wins and there's a change, will probably go to number 10. So then he will come out, make a speech. Well, he'll probably make a speech on election night, but he'll also come out and make a speech outside number 10. And then the outgoing Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, will go to the palace and formally resign. The King will accept. And then he'll leave. And it's a bit like a production line. Then the incoming Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, in this scenario, will go to the palace, tell His Majesty that he's able to form a government, or rather the King will ask, are you able to form a government? He will say yes, and then the permission will be given, and on his way he goes back to number 10, and that's probably when the speech happens, actually, after the palace, if my memory serves me correct. And then they will get on with their programme of government and state opening of Parliament and all the rest of it. But obviously there is the big summer holidays in the middle, which kind of fits in with the royal family holidays as well. So in a constitutional monarchy, the public, we the people, get to vote. We do have democracy. But it's very important to sort of have, I think, this sort of separation between the elected government and the state. Do not forget that the king, the sovereign, is the physical embodiment of the state. Rather than having a constitution or a president, they are the state. They represent the people, and the government is elected by the people to serve the people. So there is some benefits of that, continuity being one. We do know who's going to be the next sovereign after King Charles, and then we know after King William, if that's his regnal name that he takes on, we'll know it's going to be, King George. So there is that continuity, and I think it's good to have that separation. And it's also, good for the sovereign to be the font of honour. We see the garden parties, we see all of the MBEs and OBEs and CBEs and knighthoods being given out. So there are lots of perks to having a constitutional monarchy. So I thought I would read what the official royal website says about the monarchy's role. So as head of state, the monarch undertakes constitutional and representational duties overseas and back at home. We have seen a recent example with the Japanese state visit, which have developed over 1,000 years of history. In addition to these state duties, the monarch has a less formal role as head of nation. The sovereign acts as a focus for national identity, unity and pride, gives a sense of stability and continuity, officially recognises success and excellence, and supports the ideal of voluntary service. In all these roles, the sovereign is supported by members of their immediate family. And it is important to remember that no other member of the royal family has a special sort of written out role. It is only the sovereign. But what about the Prince of Wales? I might hear you say the Duke of Cornwall. That is separate. So obviously the Duke of Cornwall has to run the Duchy of Cornwall. So Prince William, the Prince of Wales, has to run that. But there is no formal role for Prince William. Prince William and Catherine could literally just sit back, run the duchy, and not do anything. That is literally what they could do. They do not have any obligations. There is no formal role. The only formal role is for the sovereign, not even the Queen. The Queen could sit back and do nothing. Of course, I'm talking Queen Camilla. I also want to run through some of the functions and duties of a sovereign. So appointing and removing the Prime Minister and other ministers. So we've just spoken about that. Dissolving Parliament to bring about general elections. It's all very relevant to today. You can see how it all fits in. Proroguing Parliament. This is disbanding it for a set period of time. And we did see a former Conservative Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, trying to prorogue Parliament, and actually got Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II to prorogue Parliament, but then Parliament overturned it. So the powers of proroguing have been they've been tested to to their utmost limits over recent years. So approving the most important laws, primary legislation, through granting what is known as royal assent. So this is when all the laws make all their way through the different stages of Parliament, and I am trying to simplify things here. So there are two houses of Parliament, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. The House of Commons is where all the MPs, the elected MPs, sit. The House of Lords they bat back and forth laws until the final version is ready to give to the king or the sovereign, and then the sovereign gives royal assent. It's only when the sovereign signs on the dotted line, if you like, that the law comes into effect. Appointing members of the House of Lords, they conduct diplomacy and agreeing treaties. So I suppose also the royal family, the sovereign, is used as a soft power by government. This is what foreign visits, state banquets, all of this, it's used as a soft power around the world, and it is very, very, very useful. Acting as head of the armed forces, being responsible for their deployment within and outside the UK, including potential or actual hostile action. So another benefit of having the monarchy, and this was, I suppose, came into its own during World War I and World War II. If the UK was invaded, if Germany had invaded and had taken London, had taken Parliament, the plan was to whisk the monarch, George VI, off to hide somewhere in Scotland and therefore be out of the reaches of the Germans. That meant that the sovereign could then actually take control of the armed forces, and just because London had been taken, as long as the king and the sovereign wasn't taken, Britain wasn't taken. So there you go. Also being head of the Church of England, which is the official religion of England. Obviously we're a multi-faith society, but the official is Church of England. And like I said, granting out honours. I forgot to mention as well that the sovereign has a weekly meeting with the elected prime minister of the day, and these details of these meetings are not supposed to be talked about or made public, and the sovereign has the right to be consulted and to ask questions, which I think is a good balance and check, especially for a sovereign that's had lots of experience like Queen Elizabeth II, and even King Charles. Although he's a new king, he is not new to the world stage. He does still have lots of experience. So, of course, there is always, talk about whether or not the UK wants to get rid of the monarchy, but support for a change is not really mainstream. There are, of course, lots of people that shout very loud. You see them with their placards. But the general consensus is that we are happy and content with our system of governance. So monarchy provides continuity to the political system. While prime ministers and governments come and go, monarchs remain in place. Even when there is a changeover in a ruler, such as with Queen Elizabeth II, it is instantaneous. As soon as Queen Elizabeth closed her eyes and passed away, we were not left without a sovereign. It's very smooth and well planned, as we saw. The monarch can act as a neutral focal point for the whole country, carrying out key ceremonial functions while maintaining distance from party political controversy. This is very important. You don't get that with a presidential system. Monarchs play an important international relations role, contributing to the soft power of the UK in and around the world. And of course, this dates back to Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria, who was known as the grandmother of Europe, who married off her daughters all the way across Europe. And we still have those family connections, and you do see that come out to play. Any replacement for the monarchy could create problems. A directly elected president, for example, could become a dynamic and destabilising personal force. We've seen examples of that around the world, haven't we? Possible objections to monarchy might include that it's undemocratic. Right, I'd like to tackle some common questions about monarchy as well. So some people ask, can the king dissolve parliament? In practice, he will only do so on the advice of the Prime Minister. As we've seen, Boris Johnson asked Her late Majesty to prorogue Parliament. Rishi Sunak asked the King to disband Parliament. In theory, he could just do it off his own will. However, that would be improper, as we have seen. Previous monarch has lost his head. Charles I tried, and although I don't think that would happen in today's world. So can the king declare war? The power to declare war exists only under the royal prerogative. The UK has not declared war since 1942. However, the potential or actual hostile military operations take place without such a declaration being issued. However, they are also carried out under the scope for the royal prerogative. So Britain can be involved in wars without necessarily asking the king, especially if we are in coalition with other countries and forces. Can the king vote? Members of the royal family are in theory allowed to vote, but they have chosen not to exercise this right, underscoring their political neutrality. So yes, they can, but no, they don't. Can the monarch refuse royal assent? So if laws are passed in front of the sovereign, can they say no and refuse to sign? So for practical and political reasons, it would be difficult for them to do so, but it remains a theoretical possibility. What normally happens is, let's just say King Charles really wasn't happy with something that was being put before him. Before it got to that stage, he could, in his weekly meetings with the Prime Minister, he could actually turn around and say, look, have you thought about this? He can ask questions, has the right to be consulted, and then hopefully something would get back to him that sort of didn't have those problems. And a good thing about that is that the monarch and the sovereign and the royal family go to the people. They go out on engagements. People wonder, what's the benefit of having royal engagements? It's being in touch with the people. The royal family are more in touch with the people than what the politicians are. They go out on a weekly basis and speak and meet normal people. So, if the Prime Minister is saying, we want to do this, we want to do this, the king can be like, well, no, when I went here, when I spoke to this person, they said this, this, and this. Maybe this is what you need to look at and focus on. So they can give feedback, which is incredibly useful. Can the monarch enter the House of Commons? So when you see the monarch at the state opening of Parliament, that's the House of Lords, the other side. So there is a long-standing tradition, rather than a legal rule, that the monarch cannot enter the House of Commons, reflecting a principle that the executive should not intimidate representatives of the people. And we have, a previous monarch did that, and it was not good. So can the monarch be arrested? The king is subject to sovereign immunity, protecting him from criminal or civil legal proceedings. Can a queen overrule the government? Monarchs possess a range of legal power. However, in most areas, they act on a basis of advice received from the Prime Minister. This is also applicable to kings as well, I should point out. And the ministers who make up their government. To refuse to allow their powers to be used in a certain way, perhaps because they disagreed with it, would be highly controversial. So yes, they could, but in theory, they kind of don't. So can a monarch be a Catholic? Under UK law, a Roman Catholic cannot become the monarch. So there you go. That's just some questions answered. So by the time of my next video, we will probably know who has been elected by the people. But because I'm going to pre-record, I won't be speaking about it until next week. So there we go. Right, thank you. If you found this video useful at all, then please give it a big old thumbs up. I know it's been a little bit rambling, but thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe. It really does help if you do those things. And leaving a comment also tells the algorithm that you've watched it all the way through and that you're engaged with the video. So thank you for watching. Mwah to you all, and goodbye. Go out and vote.